Hello, everyone. Welcome to Carpet City Cinema, a Gila Films podcast. I'm David Weaver, and just going to start this out with some great news on the Jay Leonard front. Yes, Jay Leonard, producer of Gila Films' movie The Last Frankenstein. We've been talking about how his latest directorial effort, Break Glass, which also featured some appearances by several Last Frankenstein cast members, was recently screening at the New York Cinefest down in the Village. And it did finally screen, and they had the award ceremony, and the film took home the Best Actor award for its leading man, Ricky DeRosa. So huge congrats to them for that. Jay spoke very positively of the experience of the interaction, being down there, talking with other filmmakers whose works were showing, talking with the festival director, and it was just a really great experience, great chance to get the film out to new eyes, and great recognition of what the cast and crew put into it. So big shout out to all of them. Next up, I believe, is the Jersey Short Film Festival for them, which runs from, June 28th to July 9th in good old New Jersey. So on the more Gila Films oriented route, not too much new going on. Just it's like more progress being made on the Blu-ray of The Last Frankenstein coming together. Had some emails back and forth in the last week with the distributor, just making sure everything's in order. So all is proceeding smoothly. Nothing too crazy going on there. Definitely I would suggest follow our YouTube channel, the Gila Films YouTube channel, because we will start over the next few weeks uploading some little mini interviews we shot with cast and crew, just to kind of roll out towards the actual street date of the Blu-ray. So I definitely would check that out. I did actually get approached by someone who was interested in distributing UFO Target Earth, which was very flattering. Though I think at the moment I'm still planning to self-distribute that, I could see myself doing something kind of like what we have going on with The Last Frankenstein, partnering with someone, but just handing the film off entirely to another entity. I don't really see myself doing that with UFO, although again, it was very, very flattering that they were interested, and keep it in my back pocket just in case. You never know. Elsewhere in the world, we've talked in the past few episodes about some directors who are returning to the chair, people like William Friedkin, Clint Eastwood, and another one popped up in the news recently, David Mamet, the famed playwright, Pulitzer Prize-winning playwright, Academy Award-nominated screenwriter, also has directed in the past several films. He has a new project in the works, a film about the JFK assassination, which is appropriately titled Assassination. The plot line, the official synopsis reads, quote, 1963, during a crucial justice hearing against organized crime, the head of the Chicago mob orders the assassination of President John F. Kennedy, creating a deadly conspiracy while altering the fate of a nation. End quote. This would be the first feature that Mamet's directed since 2013, in a decade. The last film he directed was the HBO TV film Phil Spector with Al Pacino and Helen Mirren, which netted several Emmy nominations. And this is going to be a theatrical release. That's the plan at the moment. Which would mean it would be the first theatrically released film he's directed in 25 years, because the last film that he helmed that was actually released in theaters was Red Belt back in 2008. But he's already got a really impressive cast lined up for this. Going into it, Al Pacino, John Travolta, Viggo Mortensen, Courtney Love, Shia LaBeouf. And it's going to be shot by Robert Elswit, who won the Best Cinematography Oscar for There Will Be Blood. So, again, it's really always very rewarding to see these filmmakers with this great history behind them who have either taken time off from directing, or have just kind of had these longer breaks in between, or like the case of Eastwood, where seeming problems between him and Warner Brothers. You thought maybe he wasn't going to get another chance to direct, and then something lines up for them to get going again. And Mamet's in his mid-70s, so it's great to the that's even at this age, he's still able to have opportunities to direct because that kind of becomes a problem sometimes as you get older. I think we talked about this too with Clint Eastwood. Is just insurance wise, people become a little leery about studios, companies, whatever, about insuring a director as they get older for a project. So really, really looking forward to seeing how this develops, and hopefully everything goes smoothly and it gets out without any big problems. Elsewhere in the news, we did have a passing that I just read about today. I wanted to talk about Paul Playdon, who probably not a household name to most people. He was a actor, a child actor originally, born in England, came over to America. A lot of TV work, guest starred on episodes of the Loretta Young Show. He was on Alfred Hitchcock Presents, this really good episode called The Glass Eye with Jessica Tandy and William Shatner. I saw that when I was younger, in a memorably creepy ending. He did have a recurring role on the 50s series The Adventures of Jim Bowie. Had a couple bit parts in movies, but really never really caught on big as a child actor, but then transitioned pretty early on in the mid 60s to writing, and it was all for television. But some big shows. Wrote for Combat, Daniel Boone, The Wild Wild West, Mission Impossible, Battlestar Galactica, Chips, the original Hawaii Five-0. Also did some producing too. He both produced and wrote for shows like Banachek and Canon, and kind of in a way, one of his more lasting contributions, even though, just the work he did, producing and writing these episodes is more than enough, is that he was a really early supporter of David Chase, who, of course, would go on to create The Sopranos. And one of the shows that Playdon worked on was The Magician, which didn't have a really long run. It was a show with Bill Bixby, and during his tenure there, he brought Chase on board to be a staff writer on that show. Not too long after that came along Kolchak the Night Stalker, of course, the cult classic horror series that had spun off from a pair of TV movies that Dan Curtis had put forth. It was a big influence, of course, later on in The X-Files. It starred Darren McGavin. And Playdon was the original producer on that show. And so he brought Chase over to that show. Unfortunately, Playdon was fired after only 2 episodes. He and Darren McGavin, who basically there was a lot of miscommunication, misunderstanding going on. McGavin really felt that going into that show, after having been in the prior TV movies, that he would have essentially producerial input on the show, producerial control, and there was a lot of back and forth between him and Playdon, which left to Playdon leaving. Chase did stay on for the show though, and basically was the senior writer for that entire series, and really spoke highly of his time there. And then later in the 70s, Chase would work with Playdon again on the TV show Switch with Eddie Albert and Robert Wagner that lasted for 3 seasons, the detective show. And of course, after that, yes, Chase would go on to become, you could argue, maybe even the father of the TV Renaissance. A lot of people trace this whole boom, this golden age of small screen product, limited series, this whole new age of golden age of television that we're going through, kind of a lot of times gets traced back to The Sopranos. So that's from David Chase, and David Chase is from Paul Playdon in a sense. So a tip of the hat to Mr. Playdon, who left us at the age of 80. So an interesting article in the paper today talking about the box office figures from this past weekend. Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 has the top spot, holding over on its second weekend. Only had a 50% dip, which might sound like a lot, but for a front-loaded title like that, it's actually a pretty good hold. And then second place is still the very successful Super Mario Brothers movie. And there was basically a query put forth in the article about whether or not, because Chris Pratt stars in Guardians of the Galaxy as Star-Lord, and he's also the voice of Mario in the Super Mario Brothers, is this an example of brand power or star power that these films are doing so well? And I saw that and I was like, I don't know, my initial reaction was just like, you've got to be kidding me to even think that this is star power. And it just kind of goes to I don't know that I have the deepest thoughts about it, but it just kind of goes to the whole question of star power now. It's such a different thing now, obviously, than the studio system. back in the day, where obviously you couldn't just put a star at Warner Brothers, a star at MGM in any film, even a crappy one, and just think that people were going to continue to see their work and they'd remain popular. But at the same time, because there was this, and I don't mean this in a derogatory sense, an almost assembly line structure to producing films during the studio era, and because the studios until what was it, the late 40s when the Supreme Court changed this up, that they owned the theaters, so they owned distribution and production, that you could really take an actor and create them into a star who had a brand, who had types of films they made, and of course you had all the movie magazines, of course, fueled this too, and columnists like Hedda Hopper and Luella Parsons. So it was just it was an era, it was a time in the industry where the nature of the industry was set up and structured in such a way that it could take an actor, create them into a bona fide star, um, give them tons of product that they can continually be in, nurture their brand, kind of find their niche, really promote them heavily, and they control distribution, so they could force their product into the theaters. And because that's really all, people basically, there were independent films, of course, still being made, and lower budget films, but a lot of the product going out was the studio fare. It was really a time in the industry which lent itself to creating stars, quote unquote stars. And time went on. A lot of changes in the industry. Like I said, they lost the control of the theaters. Independent producers and studios were on the rise. These long, very unfair contracts that basically held stars to a single studio were falling by the wayside. Yet, even though the studios essentially had less control, and of course you had the rise of television in addition to all this, the essence of being a star still existed. The Hollywood star was still someone who could bring people into a movie based off their presence and their personality and their history and their relationship with their public. I think it was more difficult for someone of that nature, of that star status, to just appear in anything, and still hold on to that status symbol. So you take someone like Spencer Tracy, who was pretty much a star right from the beginning, right? I mean, he started out in the 1930s, and by the time that decade was done, he had 2 Oscars already. And there's a little bit early in his career, he's playing second fiddle to Clark Gable in some movies, but he basically was a leading man, and he maintained that all the way till the time he passed away. I mean, his last film, Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, nominated for the Oscar for it, huge film. And he was someone who just was careful about the films he chose. And not to say that he didn't have films that didn't do well during that time, but he was careful. He didn't just rely on his reputation as a star to know that people would come to see his movies. He also picked quality work, and he continued to give great performances. So this was a time where the idea of movie stars, absolutely still existed and was able to bring people into the theaters. But I think because you didn't have the studio in control of this assembly line where they could just create the product and force it through, slap the brand of the actor or actress on it, and then push it into a studio where people had to, into a theater where people had to go see it. People had to be more careful about the movies they were going to be in if they were going to maintain that star status. Otherwise, people, they were just going to go. They had so many more options, right? All these independent studios were able to put product out now. They didn't have to, the general audience didn't have to be like, oh, well, I've only got about, half a dozen, 8 studios who are making product now. I've only got, Paramount. And if I don't like what's going on with the movies coming out from Paramount, I have to go over to Warner Brothers. I have to go to the MGM. Well, now they have all these independents coming up, and you have the drive-ins and you have television. So I think that, again, the idea of star power still existed. It just had to make actors and actresses be more careful. And I think that's lasted for some time, but I think you get into this era we're in now, and there's really a lot of dialogue going on about what is star power nowadays. Because it really does seem like it's franchise power in a lot of ways. And again, going back to the article about Chris Pratt, and no disrespect to Chris Pratt, obviously, I think it's great when an actor is able to display talent in multiple genres. He obviously, early on was doing a lot more comedic work. He was on the small screen with like Parks and Rec, and then reinvented himself into this action movie star, with the Jurassic World franchise and the Guardians of the Galaxy franchise. So, that it's definitely no diss. I'm not trying to diss him, but I just think the idea that people, are going to are flooding the box office right now on behalf of Guardians and Super Mario Brothers because of Chris Pratt is, I think it's just ridiculous. I think people are going to see Guardians of the Galaxy because it's a Marvel film and it's probably the last of the Guardians films, and they're one of the original, group of movies that came out in the Marvel and in the MCU, and there it's a very beloved franchise. And same with Super Mario Brothers. I don't, if anything, actually, it's definitely not because of Chris Pratt, because one of the consistent criticisms for that film is his vocal performance as Mario. But again, this is, right now we've had it's kind of like this mini golden era of video game adaptations. For the longest time, video game adaptations, even if they made some money, they weren't really considered good films. Everything from the originals live action Super Mario Brothers, which does have a cult following now, stuff like Double Dragon. 5,000 Uwe Boll movies, but now we're kind of in this era where, like, the Sonic the Hedgehog did well. Mortal Kombat, the newer Mortal Kombat movie, did some decent numbers and got some decent street cred. And so, Super Mario Brothers being like one of the most iconic, if not the most iconic video game ever, there was a huge expectation for this. And by all accounts, this is going to be this is going to continue this new age of the video game adaptations. So I think that that's what brings people to those movies, which isn't to say again that Chris Pratt doesn't contribute anything to these the success of these franchises, but people are going to see these movies not because of Chris Pratt. They're going because it's Marvel, Guardians of the Galaxy, in which Pratt's playing one of 5 Guardians. So it's not even a movie. It's not even like Iron Man, where you can say, well, that I think of all the superheroes, definitely within the Marvel universe, that rely, if they have any reliance on star power, would be Iron Man, obviously, and Robert Downey Jr. But especially within Guardians, where it's really, it's split between 5 characters, and I think if you ask most people, it's probably the one that sticks in the mind the most isn't even Pratt's. It's probably Rocket Raccoon. And so to think that that Pratt is what's that he's the common denominator that's bringing these the big ticket sales for these movies. It's just it's not in a million years. It's the IP, it's the intellectual property that's doing that. And I mean, just look at Pratt's non-IP stuff. Look at Passengers, the movie he did with Jennifer Lawrence, and who was riding high at the time that movie came out, and it was directed by Morton Tildum, who had just received the Best Director nomination, and it did not do well. Even with the Tomorrow War, like, I don't understand. I don't think I'm smart enough to understand the profitability of streaming, but I think it's safe to say that even if the Tomorrow War met the numbers that they were hoping for, I don't see anyone exactly clamoring for a Tomorrow War franchise. So I think, again, it's not to say that Chris Pratt can't build a reputation for himself, a name for himself outside of these IPs, but I don't think that he is the one. If you're going to look for one key factor that speaks to the success of these movies in the box office these past couple weekends, it's the IP. And so you go from that to a larger discussion again about star power. Like, it's because I was talking to Jay about this recently. Like, do we have movie stars anymore? I mean, a movie star to me is someone who it can really bring a box office success to a movie, based off of their presence alone, and generally someone who is also gets critical acclaim, and it can be even like it doesn't have to necessarily be like Academy. When I say critical acclaim, I don't necessarily mean Academy Award winning acclaim, but just someone who's really successful at the brand they're trying to sell. And it's someone who has to be able to do this for a while. You can't just, have success for 5 years. And I don't think that you might be a star, but I don't think that really speaks to star power. Like, if someone with true star power, I'd say you have to be able to keep up that success for a minimum 10 years, probably 15, before I would consider you like someone with true staying star power. And like, who is that now? I think of the people who do have that. And I think Leonardo DiCaprio is a great example. I mean, almost all of his films are successful financially and critically. He's well liked. He's very careful about the films he's chosen. Again, not to say that he hasn't had some disappointments in there for himself, like J. Edgar or A Body of Lies, movies that didn't quite, live up to expectations. But even then, they're movies that, they're noble failures, right? And even Once Upon a Time in Hollywood was that the last movie he had out. Now he, of course, has the Scorsese film, Killers of the Flower Moon, still doing very well. And I think of him as like a more modern example of star power. I think he truly is that. But then I'm like, oh yeah, but the guy's like 50 years old. So like, who is it who is younger than that? Who is it who has star power now? Because it seems like a lot of the you think of like the younger actors and actresses. Well, I mean Jennifer Lawrence even is a great example. I mean she obviously a great actress. Again, has been in lots of big IP material like X-Men and Hunger Games, but has also shown up in non franchise material with great success. Obviously, her collaborations with David O. Russell and stuff like Winter's Bone and Don't Look Up. But what was that like? She's kind of going on like 10 years since she really hit it big. She kind of had that time where some of those last few films were faltering, like the last couple X-Men movies and Red Sparrow and Passengers, like we talked about. So I think that she was, to a degree, bringing people in to see some of her films just based off her appeal, her talent. But I don't think that I think the jury's still out on her. She's obviously still very young and has some interesting projects coming up. So again, that just speaks to like who is there a modern day star? I mean, think of some of the people who have become popular within the last few years, whether it's Tom Holland off of the Spider-Man movies or Timothy Chalamet is obviously, a big deal now. But again, they're both very early in their careers. The jury's kind of, like I said, jury's kind of out still. And I don't think either of those two guys, even though they're both very well liked, very well acclaimed, I don't think they have yet achieved that ability to really sell a movie totally on their own presence. I mean, go back to like the beginning of the superhero renaissance, which I guess you could trace back to, like 99, 2000 and the X-Men movies and the Spider-Man movies. I mean, Tobey Maguire's done, a lot of great work outside of the Spider-Man films, needless to say, but he never really achieved the status that would, sell tickets just on his strength alone. He never really became, I mean, he was a movie star, but again, speaking to that kind of that star power, that ability to just bring people into the theaters based on who you are and the kind of movies you make. I don't think he ever achieved that. And that's not a bad thing, right? It's like that shouldn't necessarily be an actor or actress's goal. As long as you're happy, you're making the movies you want to make, that's really all that matters. But it's just kind of, these kind of thoughts are things that, Jay and I, for example, have been talking about recently. And again, seeing that article, it just kind of makes me wonder, are we kind of nearing the end of, well, I think that's too extreme. You're definitely never going to reach the end of it. But are we definitely are we in a period now where we're seeing, at least for the time being, a true decline in the concept of star power and what that means? And really we're more in an era of franchise power. Obviously, a lot more power on the small screen. And that the ability of an actor or actress just to really bring people to the theaters in droves, just off who they are, that's really something we're not going to see as much. Again, like I said, you got DiCaprio. I think Denzel Washington's a great example of someone who, can bring people in just off his presence. But again, Denzel Washington's been doing it for a long time, so it's definitely not someone who I would think of as more recent. I mean, I guess one person who kind of comes to mind, especially within the action genre, is someone like Dwayne Johnson, The Rock. But I mean, he's kind of seen as like the action star of this current time period, the kind of the answer to the Schwarzenegger, the Stallone, the Lundgren of the 80s and 90s. But I don't think that's a great, even that's a great comparison, because a lot, again, even he's had a number of films that have cost a lot of money to make, and they're definitely heavily built and promoted around his presence. They just don't quite live up to really those financial expectations. Black Adam being a great example. That did not really do the numbers they wanted to see. Jungle Cruise, I know a lot of people who like that movie, but it made like 220 million, and it cost like 220 million to make. Some of his biggest success obviously is around his time with the Fast and Furious films. Um, so even something like that, who I think most people, when they think of Dwayne Johnson, they do think of him as a star, as someone who has this really likable personality. And obviously, he has his hands in everything. Television, producing, promoting, non-media brands. Um, and I have a huge respect for, even though I'm not a fan of his films. That's not really my thing. I do have a huge respect for him as just a hard worker, this incredible work ethic that not just obviously towards fitness and his wrestling career, but also translating that into producing and acting and promoting the guys like nonstop. But I think you can kind of even see in the trajectory of his film career and the kind of inconsistency to the response to his films, that even someone like him, who's considered as probably one of the biggest action stars of our current era, still doesn't have the star power of people like even like what 25 now, like 30 years ago with the action stars, like I said, of like Schwarzenegger and Stallone. So it's just again, I'm not here to preach any solid answers on any of this, or um, to have any great conclusions. It's just something more me basically rambling on about something that I just think about a lot without knowing necessarily all the answers. What's going on with the concept of star power in this era? Is it just is it just a temporary decline? What's the next phase going to be? Do we have anyone among us, actress or actor, who is going to bring that back in force, or who really even has it now? I mean, especially younger people. Like, think of someone, I don't know, 35 or younger. Obviously, it's difficult when you're younger because by virtue of being younger, you might not have as many films under your belt. I'm talking about, being able to have a good 10 to 15-year run to establish star power. And if you start out when you're 20, you'd have to be like 35 now to really speak to that. But even under 40, it's hard to think of like a lot of people who have, like I said, that true star power. Yeah, Bradley Cooper. I think Bradley Cooper has shown that, but his, with the issues with the pandemic and him now doing stuff behind the camera, it's hard to say where if that's going to continue, because just I think his outputs, still highly regarded, still well liked, but it's just a little more spaced out. It'll be interesting to see what happens, with some of the films he has coming up, like Maestro. But he's definitely someone who has that quality, has the potential to kind of establish himself in that vein. But yeah, those are my ramblings on star power. So, in terms of new releases, I did just want to give a quick shout out to Cauldron Films, which is the physical media label co founded by Jesse Nelson, also known as the man behind Diabolic DVD, the online retailer for physical media, cult and world cinema, and all kinds of stuff. Actually, great site to check out. But that label, Cauldron Films, has just announced their newest wave of titles, which are available for pre order at their website, www.cauldron-films.com. The first of them is from 1987, and it's Off Balance. And I'm just going to read the plot summary, because I haven't seen any one of these three movies. The plot summary from the website. Quote, when a mysterious disease befalls young virtuosic pianist Robert Dominici, played by Michael York, he begins a violent, murderous rampage, taunting authorities with his whereabouts. As Robert's brain and body rapidly decay, Inspector Dati must race to find him before he kills again, end quote. And Inspector Dati there is played by the great Donald Pleasance. So the cast also includes, aside from York, who of course we all know from, well, more modern, newer, younger people would know him from the Austin Powers films, so of course has this great legacy. Zeffirelli's Taming of the Shrew and Romeo and Juliet. He was in the Three Musketeers films, Logan's Run, and of course Donald Pleasance. We all know him from the Halloween franchise. The cast, though, also includes Edwige Finish, the great and very lovely European genre actress. It also has someone who we just discussed recently, having passed away, Giovanni Lombardo Radice. And it was directed by Ruggero Deodato, who, of course, gave us Cannibal Holocaust. The second film in the batch of these just newly announced titles is Top Line, starring Franco Nero. Yes, Django himself. And this is from 1988. And the plot summary for this is, quote, down and out author Ted Angelo, Franco Nero, finds a UFO while searching a cave for treasure. When he tries to warn the media, he soon becomes hunted by various clandestine organizations. But with the help of his new friend June, played by Deborah Moore of Warriors of the Apocalypse, they search for the truth while evading certain death. Have the aliens taken over the world? I want to believe. End quote. This what speaks highly to me about this film is in the cast is none other than the one, the only George Kennedy, the great Academy Award-winning actor of Cool Hand Luke, the Airport franchise, Earthquake, so many films. One of my favorite actors of the 60s and 70s. You cannot go wrong with a George Kennedy movie, so I'm very much looking forward to checking this movie out just for his presence. I mean, he started doing a lot of genre work in the 80s, stuff like The Terror Within for Corman. Of course, he was in Just Before Dawn, Demon Warp, did some great and Clark films. But yeah, definitely that's one of the big selling points for me is his presence. And then the third title is The Last Match, and this is the most recently released of these films. It's from '91. And here we go for the plot summary for this. The Last Match. Quote, what do you do when your daughter is framed for drug smuggling during a Caribbean vacation while being held in jail by a sadistic warden, played by Henry Silva? If you're a football star, Cliff Gaylor, played by Oliver Tobias, you call an audible and do whatever you can to get her out. But when the American consulate, played by Charles Napier, doesn't want to be involved, and the local attorney, played by Martin Balsam, only wants you to grease his palm with no guarantees, your only choice is to take matters into your own hands. Before he can even call the next play, his coach, Ernest Borgnine, and the rest of the football team in full uniform are on a plane packed with weapons and money aimed to free his daughter or die trying. End quote. This sounds like a lot of fun. Yes. Ernest Borgnine, again, kind of at that same era as George Kennedy. He started out about 10 years earlier, but also Academy Award-winning actor, and they did some films together as well. But another actor, just kind of like that really great era of these grizzled men who just looked like they'd really had a life kick them around a bit, but were just incredible physical presence. Were incredibly gifted actors. A lot of them of this era were actors who had come out of military service, whether it be World War II or Korea. And yeah, a lot of them also did genre stuff later on. And so that, again, Borgnine being in this film as well as, of course, Martin Balsam, great actor, another Academy Award winner. And just the plot summary that, basically it sounds like Dirty Dozen kind of rescue mission, but with a football team. I think this is probably the one I'm looking forward to the most of the three. It's this, then Top Line, then Off Balance. But all three are coming out with a bunch of extras. They are available for pre-order now, limited editions with slipcases and wondrous accoutrements such as that. So definitely check those out. It's a really great label. It's been going just under 20 titles now. In fact, The Last Match is number 15. Will be released number 15, and they've already dipped their toe into 4K too with their release of City of the Living Dead, which is now the definitive release of that classic Lucio Fulci horror movie, which has had it's more than its fair share of DVD and Blu-ray launches in the past, but they finally put the cherry on the top of it with their recent UHD of that. So yeah, check those out for sure. And now we're just going to move on to the movie of the week. I guess that's what I should call it, especially with my love for the mid-century. It's a movie, the first movie I've talked about on the podcast that I'd already seen before, but never quite like this. It's from 1953. It's called Jennifer. And this is a movie that stars Ida Lupino as Agnes Langley, a single woman who has kind of a sensitive personality, who badly in need of a job. She takes on the role of a caretaker of a large estate owned by this wealthy family. And the property, which is this incredible Spanish colonial home, massive, is being put up for sale, but is currently unoccupied. So they just need someone to be on the premises while they're waiting for a new buyer to come along. And Jennifer refers to the prior caretaker of the property, who was a cousin of the owners, a member of the kind of like a little more distant member of the family, who disappeared mysteriously. So Agnes, Ida Lupino, arrives at this place and finds herself being slowly obsessed with the idea of what happened to Jennifer. There's kind of whispers and gossip among the people in the local village. Um, she finds things around the house like a diary and left behind belongings that suggest to her that maybe something untoward happens to Jennifer. And of course, again, like some of the things the townspeople are saying, some of their theories about what happened to Jennifer, only fuel this apprehension she has about the fate of Jennifer. And then introduced into this narrative is the character of Jim Hollis, who is a local businessman. He owns the local lodge and the local grocery store, and he's played by Howard Duff, who was married to Lupino in real life at the time. And he kind of presents himself. He's kind of presented in the narrative as someone who is both seems to be interested in Agnes romantically, physically, but could he also at the same time be someone who may have knowledge or direct involvement with the fate of the unseen Jennifer? Um, I first saw this movie probably 25 years ago. It was airing on Encore Movieplex. And I don't even know what that channel is. That channel even still around? I don't know. But I taped it off TV, and this film has never had any type of physical media release up until now. It never released on VHS or DVD or anything. You could watch a copy, kind of a really crappy copy on YouTube, which is still up there. It's owned by Paramount, and for a while they did have it streaming on Prime, but then they took it down, and again, even that was like an old master. And just was incredibly excited to see that Imprint Films out of Australia had released this from a 4K scan on Blu-ray, from a 4K scan done by Paramount. So when I first saw it, like I said, 25 years ago, I really liked it a lot. I really enjoyed it a lot. And my feelings on the film, I think they're more fleshed out now than when I was in my teen years. But I think they're still pretty similar in terms of what I take away from the film. I did revisit it for the first time in forever last Halloween. And, during October, I kind of watch something horror related each day, one thing, either a movie or an episode of a TV show or whatever, a special. And I dug out of a box, my boxes of VHS tapes, which are packed away in a closet, the same tape with the movie recorded off TV, and had a good time checking it out, even though the quality wasn't great. And then of course watched it. Actually, just watched it last night with my girlfriend off the Blu-ray, which was a revelation. Just to see this new transfer. It looks great, and it's a film that had a problematic production, or I should say, probably more post-production. But despite that, and despite its flaws, is a very effective, moodily effective, effective in terms of the atmosphere it generates, because it's about this woman who's unsettled by nature. The character of Agnes alludes, when she goes for the job and she speaks to Lorna Gale, who is basically the representative of the Gale family, which owns this large estate. Lorna Gale, played by Mary Shipp, says to her, your last job was like 4 months ago, and Agnes says, well, I haven't been well lately, and she's very sensitive around people. She's very apprehensive around Howard Duff's character of Jim Hollis. You can tell that she's uncomfortable with just like him physically being around her and stopping by to check up on, make sure she's okay. And so she's this person with this sensitive, nervous, slightly high-strung a personality, and she's stuck within this massive, incredible building, this incredible house, where like I said, there's this mystery of like this intrigue about the previous person they're having just vanished. So you have this person who is your, essentially your protagonist, the character you are with, spending time with, and she's in this isolated situation, this mysterious situation, and she already has this hypersensitive nature to her, about whatever mysterious goings on may have occurred, about even just interacting with people. And the film is really effective at kind of bringing you into that, I don't know if I'd say mindset, but that kind of like emotional set that she has. As you watch the film, you feel alone within the space of the film. You feel like you're with her and isolated and not knowing what's going on. And you know, the way the film achieves that, part of it is just the great decision to film this in an actual location. And picking this incredible building to shoot at. I mean, the film was shot mostly down, if not all of it, because I went deep. I dove deep into some research on this film. It was shot in Montecito, California, and they have some incredible properties there, and some of which are really greatly representative of the Spanish colonial architecture design. And so, whatever this building they used, it's just it's magnificent in terms of its design. It's incredible woodwork on the doors, and just amazing piece of architectural design, massive but empty. And so you're in this incredibly aesthetically pleasing location that's real, but at the same time, because it's so devoid of life and so devoid of furniture and decor, that it just really it's something that feels real. Yet at the same time, because of that, it also because it's so empty, it just sells that idea of isolation even more. Versus if they had filmed this on a set, if they had built a set for the house and even sparsely populated it and tried to create the same effect, I just think you would have always just felt like, yeah, but I'm on a set, and right on the other side of that wall is probably half a dozen craftsmen in another set that's getting built for another project. But the choosing to shoot this on location was a really good idea at selling the reality of the locale, and therefore because of that, selling the isolation within that locale, and the constant sense of dread. Because I live out in the country, and I know that people who have moved from like a city location, a more urban location, to the country, sometimes it's unsettling at first, because now you're in this huge open space, and a dog barking from miles away travels to you, and you know that you're alone. So if something was to happen to you, it would be harder to get help. And those kind of same kind of unnerving feelings exist within a situation like this for this character, Ida Lupino's character Agnes, where she's in this massive house where if you were to go through and lock every door, by the time you got to the last door, someone could have broken in through the first door without you even knowing about it. And it's even more apprehensive because you know that the previous occupier disappeared strangely. So that's definitely a big part of the success of the film, creating this sense of unnerve, is the choice to shoot it on location, but also just big shout out to Lupino. I mean, obviously she's a great actress. Been around since. I mean, I know she's been around since the 30s, maybe even before that. But just obviously known for such classic films as High Sierra and They Drive by Night, Roadhouse. She did The Hard Way, The Light That Failed. And obviously had this whole other career as a pioneering female director and producer. And she does a great job at playing this character who's just with this personality, whether it's partly just of who she is and partly because of things she's experienced, that she alludes to throughout the film. She talks later on, as we get to know her character better, she alludes to having essentially been abandoned in a past relationship. So that you can only imagine how that plays into her feelings of isolation. But she does just such a great job in selling this character who's constantly at unease and put in a situation which would only amplify those feelings that she has. Also, just incredible cinematography on this film. James Wong Howe shot this movie. The famous two-time Oscar-winning cinematographer who shot movies like The Thin Man and Picnic and John Frankenheimer's Seconds, which you definitely want to check out. He shot HUD and The Rose Tattoo. Those were the two that he won the Oscar for. And, unfortunately, he had fallen somewhat victim to the communist witch hunt, and it wasn't totally blacklisted, but was kind of graylisted, kind of found some difficulty finding work, especially in the post-World War II, immediate post-World War II era. And then by the mid-50s, he was pretty much back up and running on prestige projects. But just the way he shoots it, and not just the way he shoots in this movie, but the way he lights, just incredible cinematography. A lot of use of what, even if it's not natural light, it seems like natural light. A lot of the interior shots. Just again, I don't know if he how he necessarily went about lighting a lot of the interior scenes in the house, but it just feels very naturalistic in a way that's very unusual for the time period, especially if you're used to watching a lot of studio films. It's something you might see in some more indie films of the 50s era, early to mid 50s era, but definitely something that just really stands out as stylishly different. I mean, his use of light and shadow in certain shots. I mean, there's a scene where Howard Duff and Ida Lupino are having a conversation in this large room with this huge, almost like this huge window that Ida Lupino gets up from this table and goes and walks to, and then Duff comes up and walks up and stands behind her, and so that when they're talking to each other, but Lupino has her back to Duff. They're both facing the same direction, both facing towards the window, but he's a little bit behind her, and even though she's talking with him, she's really looking out the window, and then as the conversation continues, one after the other, they turn around. They both end up 180ing, and as they turn around, they go from being half lit to half in shadow, and it's just incredibly well shot. And there's another great scene where Lupino is walking around the grounds of the property and comes across the gardener. And he's like, burning leaves. He's got a leaf pile that he's burning, and just incredible use of these shafts of light going through like the smoke coming off the burn pile. It's just incredibly well shot, incredibly stylish. So that, I mean, what more can you ask for when you have great, effective, mood building, stylish, eye catching cinematography taking place at a incredible real life location? So just like artistically speaking, it's a very effective film. And then the music score by Ernest Gold. This was, right before Ernest Gold really kind of hit his stride as a composer for A projects. He would win the Oscar in 1960 for Exodus for the music score for that, and composed many of the films that Stanley Kramer directed. Also did Sam Peckinpah's Cross of Iron in the 70s. But he did work on lower budgeted films, earlier in his career. And there are some moments which might seem a little over the top. There's times when the music score where he almost uses these like ethereal, spectral vocals. But I find them, I like them. I think maybe he could have pulled back a little bit on those moments. But I think the idea of it and the general execution of it is really effective. And again, just unnerving you and rattling you. These kind of almost spirit like vocal sounds used in his score, but he's also got some more instrumental moments, which again, actually during that scene I was just talking about, where Lupino and Duff are at the window and really strikingly lit. It's a much more instrumental piece going, and a much more low key piece going on at that point, which is it's a theme in the score that he uses a couple times, which I found very effective in that moment in kind of creating a sense of sadness. And that's what a lot of what's going on in this film. It's isolation, it's sadness, it's unnerving. You have this character Ida Lupino who's just, like I said, she talks about how she hasn't been well lately. She's really needs this job. So she's someone who's coming from a place of vulnerability, has a need. She comes to this place where she's completely isolated. She knows bad things has happened in the past. She doesn't get along well with people. And, you have this character played by Howard Duff who's interested in her romantically. And that's something that unsettles her. So it's just all these different layers of what is essentially emotional stress and unease for this character who you are spending so much time with in this huge empty place. And so the film really does a great job of putting you inside her emotional state. And the mystery of Jennifer, of what happened to her, is intriguing because as the film progresses, and I don't want to give away, too much, but different things start happening, different things start being found, and different stories start being heard by Agnes, by Ida Lupino's character, that could indicate something really bad happened to Jennifer, and that some of the main characters might know more than they're relating. But there are things that happen in such a way, or things that are found of such a nature, that it could also be a harmless interpretation. It could just be coincidence. And how much of the mystery of Jennifer is really being created by Agnes It's really being created by her own personal emotional situation and kind of projecting and obsessing over what could have happened to this person. Especially, and I think this is important without being a spoiler, is especially as we learn eventually in the film that she had been in a relationship with someone who had abandoned her. So that, again, another layer of isolation that she has. I don't want to say abandonment issues, but she just was abandoned, and how much does that play into things? So this is really a really well done mood piece. You could even say a character study, but I think that plays a backseat a little bit to the more mood piece nature of it. It's a film that generates uh, this mood of suspenseful isolation, and that's really what it's about. It's about taking you in, making you feel um, making you feel alone and tense and uneasy as you make your way through the film and try to unravel the mystery of Jennifer. And then secondary to that, it is about this character of Agnes because she's who you're spending so much time with. And even though you might not have necessarily everything spelled out about her, which I think is why the part of why the idea of this being a character piece um, is slightly secondary to the more mood elements. Um, it still is a film that's heavily about her, and because you're seeing everything through her eyes, um, and registering things through her emotional state. Now, as I've said about other movies in the past, I don't want to oversell it, and ignore its weaknesses, right? I think, for example, Howard Duff. He's a good actor. He had before he and Lupino even paired up, which they met while making the movie Woman in Hiding, which is a film I definitely recommend, a solid noirish movie. He had already had several acclaimed films under his belt, movies like The Naked City, Brute Force, All My Sons, and he and Lupino made several films together. They got married after Woman in Hiding. Overall, I think they appeared in like half a dozen films together. They had their own TV show, a comedy in the 50s, Mr. Adams and Eve. They guest starred on shows together. Separated sometime in the 60s, but stayed married, didn't actually divorce till the mid 80s. And I like Duff overall in a lot of the pictures I've seen him in. I think in this film, his performance is just kind of odd, I guess, for lack of a better way of describing it. I think it's odd in terms of what I would register as inconsistency of character. Um, there are times where Jim Hollis, this person he's playing, it just seems like what you'd expect, very naturalistic. He's interested in Ida Lupino's character and making romantic not romantic conversation, but conversation with her to try to get to know her better and try to get her to open up to him. There's times where he's just going about the business of his job or dealing with the estate because he's helping the family to sell the estate, and all that seems very natural. But there are other times where his character behaves in ways that seem more stiff or off-putting. There's a scene where he's talking with Lupino. It's at nighttime, and they're taking a walk, and she sits down, and she has this like sweater or draped over her shoulders, so like her arms aren't in the sleeves. It's just draped over her, and he's kind of talking to her, trying to get her to open up about her issues with sensitivity, and as he's doing it, he's like fiddling with her like empty sleeves on the sweater and then like kind of like putting his hand up one of the empty sleeves and kind of doing stuff with it. And at this point, he already knows that she's kind of sensitive about people. There was a scene where he went to reach for a pack of cigarettes of his, and she kind of reacted like it appeared like she thought he was going to try to touch her, and so he already kind of knows what's up with her. And so when he's kind of like manhandling, pawing her sweater as he's trying to get her open up about her emotional state, it's kind of like, dude, I mean, if you want to be with this woman and get to develop a relationship with her, you're kind of going about it a weird way. And there are other moments too where like, not in a sense, they seem like very deliberate choices where his like delivery of certain lines is, and his actual just his physical approach, just his stance, even his bearing as he delivers certain lines, just feels very stiff and unnatural, but in a very deliberate way. Not like he was phoning it in or didn't care, but almost like it was a conscious decision. And I wonder if, because I've seen Duff in other things, and I think he's likable in other films, likable in terms of like his abilities as an actor. I wonder if part of that could just be attributed to the filmmakers wanting to not have the audience know what his real motivation is. In other words, like I said at the beginning, he kind of presents himself as someone who's, the leading man, essentially interested in Lupino's character. But then again, might he know something about Jennifer or have been involved in Jennifer's disappearance? So maybe it was more a conscious decision on either filmmakers or Duff himself to kind of play it like this, so that you wouldn't necessarily know, guess ahead of time what the outcome was going to be in terms of who his character really was. Um, but it just kind of seems like the wrong way to go about it. So that seems it's kind of an unusual performance, especially from him. Also, is the casting of Robert Nichols as Oren, who is this guy who works at the store that Howard Duff's character owns, and he's supposed to be 19 years old. This character, and it's important because he's one of the people he's like the key townsperson who's always kind of talking about what happened to Jennifer, and he has all these theories about that something basically bad happened to her, and he tells people that unlike everyone else, he's actually seen Jennifer, because that's something that's talked about early in the film too. Is like no one ever saw her. If she needed something from the grocery store, she'd have it dropped off, and they'd never actually see her face to face. But Oren, this character of Oren, this 19-year-old, he saw her. And he's obviously attracted to Lupino's character and tries to get her to go out on a date with him. And he's constantly kind of like building up the whole mystery of Jennifer. And like I said, he's a 19-year-old, but he's played by Robert Nichols, who's a well-known character actor from that era, who was in his mid-30s at the time, and is clearly in his mid-30s. Not even a chance. This isn't even like Steve McQueen in The Blob, where he's supposed to be a high schooler, but he's 28. But McQueen still kind of looked younger. It's a stretch still, but you go for it. I mean, this guy looks like he could almost be 40. And if you don't know Robert Nichols by name, fans of science fiction, Golden Age science fiction, know him from The Thing from Another World and This Island Earth. He also had a key role in Giant, the George Stevens movie. Showed up in a lot of TV stuff. Just Google him. You'll know who I'm talking about if you're a fan of this era of cinema. And he is someone who has kind of like soft features, kind of like a rounded face, rounded ears. So I can see on one hand, while he has kind of certain aspects, physical aspects, which lend themselves to youth, but he's just totally too old for this character, whose behavior is very much of a 19-year-old. Like the behavior that they're having this character engage in is something that would seem more of a younger person. In a way, it's kind of, even though it's miscasting and it's not who they should have had play that part from the sense of just being age realistic. It does also kind of just, I have to admit, at the same time, there's an effective aspect to it where it kind of like amplifies the unsettling nature of the whole film. That you have this person who's like in their mid-30s, playing a teenager, acting kind of like a teenager in some ways. It just seems strange, but it's a strange story with strange goings on and like I said, unsettling mood. So it kind of, it's at least they, I mean, it could have been worse if they were going to miscast by age, if they were going to cast someone who was not age appropriate. I think they chose a good person for it, because his performance and the look of him playing someone whose behavior is obviously of a younger person is unsettling in and of itself, and so it adds to the proceedings for sure. And the ending to the film. I won't get into details, obviously, but the ending of the film, yeah, just watch it. Like literally, like the last shot will have you kind of like, wait, what's going on here? And I will say that this movie was based on a short story by someone named Virginia Myers. It was published in Cosmopolitan back in 1949, and I found a copy of that Cosmopolitan on eBay because, like I said, I went down a deep hole with this movie, and because I couldn't find a copy of the story just to read online. Maybe I should have looked harder. And I don't, this author Virginia Myers, I was not familiar with her. I don't know that she ever had any published works or anthologies. So I just bought the Cosmo, and it's on its way to me. So I'm looking forward to actually reading the short story and seeing what the relation is between the original material and the adaptation, and how close it adheres or changes, which I'll definitely get back to you about in a future episode. The film, though, kind of had some trouble in its production, so it's credited to a director named Joel Newton, who does not exist. The film was actually directed by a guy named Bernard Gerard. And Gerard was a director, also did some writing, who just really couldn't seem to catch a break in terms of his films. He's kind of, I don't know if I'd go as strong as a cult reputation, but he definitely has a following, and he's done a lot of, definitely done some interesting work. Um, but so often with his films, they were tampered with. Um, and Jennifer was no exception. So, like some of the films that Gerard went on to direct were A Name for Evil, which is a '70s horror movie, very interesting horror film with Robert Culp and Samantha Eggar, which was recut. Against his wishes, he did a movie called The Mad Room, kind of like a suspense-like film with Stella Stevens and Shelley Winters, which he again that was taken and recut against his wishes. He was very unhappy about that. Even one of his probably better known films, less tampered with movies, the heist film Dead Heat on a Merry-Go-Round from the late '60s with James Coburn. The ending of that, the very ending part of that was cut off. He was the original director on Whatever Happened to Aunt Alice, and replaced after 4 weeks of filming. He did the budget DVD label staple, Gone with the West, with James Caan and Sammy Davis Jr., which was a Western shot in '69, but not released till '74. It was released in a couple different versions with multiple titles. Probably best known now as the film playing in the theater in the '70s horror cult classic Messiah of Evil. But yeah, just time after time, he had his work recut on him, and what's left is interesting enough to have created an affection for his abilities, but it's just like I said, just kept falling victim to recuts, and Jennifer was the same thing. So again, like I said, I took a deep dive on this film and found a blog over at the Movies Unlimited website titled Ida Lupino and the Making of Jennifer, written by Jennifer Burzin. And for this piece, Burzin actually was able to interview Robert Nichols. So it was written before he passed away, the actor who played the much younger than he looked like Oren. And in here she talks about how how no you couldn't find out anything about the credited director on Jennifer, this Joel Newton, and Nichols in the interview that she conducted with him revealed that Gerard both wrote and directed the movie. Which, interestingly, when you watch the credits to Jennifer, it has no credit for producer or writer on it. But Gerard, like I said, Nichols said that Gerard directed and wrote the film. And here's a quote from Robert Nichols in this interview. He says, I thought he, referring to Gerard, I thought he was very gifted. Ida Lupino had final cutting rights, and she was not happy with it. She recut the film, and Barney, Bernard Gerard, took his name off as writer and director. And then later, Nichols says, in referring to why he thinks that Lupino recut it, he said that in the final version of the film, quote, she came across as being very neurotic, and she didn't like that, and she changed a few scenes so she was less neurotic, end quote. But the interesting thing on top of that is if you go over to the American Film Institute catalog site, which I've mentioned in some past episodes, especially the Deadly Trackers. It's a great resource for talking about productions of films. Apparently there were some actors who were supposed to be in this movie who weren't in the final release version. So Hollywood Reporter listed the cast as including Jeff York, who appeared in several Disney films around this time. He played Mike Fink in Davy Crockett and the River Pirates. He was in Old Yeller and Johnny Tremaine. But he's not in the film. Like, he was listed on the cast member as a cast member by Hollywood Reporter. He's not in the film. Another actress, also Frances Osborne, listed, and an actor named Dob Gibson, were all supposed to be in the movie. But when you watch the movie, either they're not in there, or you can't seem to find them. The film is also supposed to be the last acting credit of a veteran character actress named Kitty McHugh, and she is accredited. She is listed in the opening credits. But according to IMDb, she plays the landlady. That's what her character is supposed to be. But there is no landlady in this movie, nor anyone who even approaches that characterization. Now, this isn't unheard of. There are times where actors get credited in a movie and their scenes get cut, but they're still in the credits. Again, not unheard of. But when you think about this in the context of the films, the film was recut by Lupino, who, of course, by this time had established herself as a filmmaker. It kind of makes you wonder how much, what, if anything, how much was left on the proverbial cutting room floor. Were there scenes that were cut because they truly were extraneous, as happens with every film? I mean, even The Last Frankenstein had a short scene that was cut; it just wasn't necessary. Or did the cutting of these scenes really compound any issues with the movie, and would more have been better explained? Would the film have a slightly different narrative had that stuff been left in? I mean, I doubt that footage exists anymore. Not likely that that was ever saved, so we'll probably really never know. I do have interestingly, I have a university press book on Lupino, and they give like the shortest mention of this film. It's like a sentence or two in that book. And Lupino did write an autobiography, so now I kind of want to pick that up and see if she discusses it at all. And then in that, and of course, pretty much I think everyone involved in this film has passed on. So it just kind of remains a mystery as to what the film's if there was a different vision for the film or a slightly different structure to the narrative in the original version that Bernard Gerard had in mind. I mean, I feel the film's pretty consistent in the way it tells its story, and the way it kind of deliberately walks this fine line between presenting the strange things happening and the mystery of Jennifer and the strange occurrences at this estate as possibly being evidence of something sinister, or it could just be coincidence that Lupino misinterprets. And the film's pretty consistent, like I said, in walking in straddling the fence so that it doesn't like lean too far one way or the other and play its hand too early. But when you get to the ending, especially mainly like the last shot, you kind of wonder, was there something else? Was there something in the missing footage? Was there missing footage, and did it have something else in it that might have explains things differently in this film or more fully? And again, I can't, without giving spoilers, I really can't get too much into that, but you'll definitely know what I'm talking about when you see it. Now, seeing the film, that is kind of a bit of a trick because, like I said, this has only been released by Imprint Films out of Australia. It's part of their most recent volume in their Essential Film Noir collections. And it's volume 4 in that series, the most recent one. And yeah, I mean, it's the only physical media release this film's ever had. And because it's part of this set of films, it's a total of 5 movies in this set. And because you're importing it, you have to import it from Australia. It's not cheap to buy this. And unfortunately, Jennifer's the only film on this set that has no like commentary tracks or has bonus features. The other movies on this set are Rope of Sand with Burt Lancaster, and Yvonne De Carlo, Appointment with Danger with Alan Ladd, the Humphrey Bogart movie The Enforcer, and sharing the same disc with Jennifer, another 50s film, Beware My Lovely, that stars Ida Lupino and Robert Ryan. And that film, of all these 5 films, this is the first time ever of a legitimate physical media release for both Jennifer and Beware My Lovely. Now, I could see Jennifer getting, I guess I can imagine like someone like Kino Lorber releasing this at some point because it's owned by Paramount, which is a label they deal with. It seems like the kind of film they put out. I can imagine putting it on one of their film noir volumes, but I have no knowledge of them doing that anytime soon. Now, I keep using the term film noir. This is not a film noir, but it is a film that kind of gets labeled a lot, lumped in with film noirs. It does obviously have the very moody lighting and sense of mystery to it, but it is definitely much more a suspense film. And definitely, in no way would I really think of this as a film noir, even though it does oftentimes gets categorized like one. Now, what I think would make, if you do watch this film, I highly recommend as a double feature watching this with a movie from 1958, a horror film, which many people don't like, possibly because it was riffed by Mystery Science Theater, but which I'm a huge fan of, and that's The Screaming Skull. And why do I recommend those two for a double feature. The first time I ever saw Jennifer, I knew that these were like left hand, right hand. They were a match pair. They are very. It's so interesting all the similarities between these two films. So if you're not familiar with The Screaming Skull, that also takes place at a large, massive isolated estate out in the countryside, which is empty, is just about to be occupied by a man named Eric and played by John Hudson, and his new bride, Jenny, played by Peggy Weber. This is the second marriage for Eric, his prior wife having died in an accident, and so this large estate was their house, but had basically been boarded up, closed up while he wasn't living there, and looked over by a gardener, a simple-minded gardener named Mickey, played by the film's director Alex Nichol. And Jenny, this character of Jenny, who's essentially the lead character, really kind of dominates the proceedings. She is, like Ida Lupino's character in Jennifer, a very emotionally sensitive person because she had undergone a very traumatic experience in her youth, having seen both her parents drown. And so both these films are about women who, through things they have endured, or it's implied they have endured, are very emotionally fragile and sensitive. They both find themselves on these large, isolated properties, and they both find themselves surrounded by a haunting mystery, which in the case of Jenny and the Screaming Skull is she begins to come under the belief that the spirit of her husband's first wife is haunting the property. She begins to see visions of a skull. She hears strange noises at night, and like Jennifer, the Screaming Skull is extremely effective in creating this sense of paranoid isolation. And like Jennifer, it achieves it the same way through really effective aesthetics. As Jennifer was shot by James Wong Howe, a very famous cinematographer, The Screaming Skull was shot by Floyd Crosby, also a very famous cinematographer, also an Academy Award winner, who's probably best known for High Noon is probably his best known work. His actual Oscar was from an early 30s film called Taboo, the story of the South Seas. And Crosby, who, yes, is the father of David Crosby, of Crosby, Stills, and Nash, in case that question popped in your mind. He was someone who Roger Corman used a lot because Corman said he was a really great cinematographer, but who could also work really quickly. And The Screaming Skull, and to what degree it was decisions made by Crosby, or to which degree it was decisions made by Alex Nichol, the director, who spent most of his career as an actor, a well-known character actor, but he did direct a few films too. It's very stylishly directed in attempting to achieve the sense of terror and paranoia, and attempting to keep the audience wondering. In The Screaming Skull, our female protagonist, is she really being haunted, or is she suffering from at the hands of her own mental health issues? The film employs lots of point of vision shots and tracking shots, but from unseen sources, like you don't know where they're coming from. Lots of great moving shots. It's an incredibly creepy film, which unfortunately has this, kind of reputation, possibly because of, some cheesy effects near the end, and some of the acting in The Screaming Skull is definitely a little stiff and unnatural, not as strong as performances overall as Jennifer. And because of that, I think, and of course, because Mystery Science Theater ripped it, it kind of gets not looked at as a good film, but I think it's a great film despite those flaws, just because of the mood it creates and how effectively it builds a sense of tension and suspense. And again, also has a very effective music score for what it needs to accomplish, which is also scored by Ernest Gold. So it has the same composer as Jennifer. And he utilizes some of the same techniques in terms of those kind of like ethereal, spiritual vocals. He does the very similar thing in The Screaming Skull, which also at times is a bit maybe over the top, but effective. Um, and Jennifer, I mean, sorry, The Screaming Skull is basically just a five-character film. It's the husband, the wife, the gardener, and then there's a pair of neighbors, a minister and his wife. And coincidentally, again, another connection between these two films, the actor Russ Conway, who plays the minister in The Screaming Skull, Reverend Snow, who's the neighbor and friend to our main characters, he also plays the gardener in Jennifer. The gardener, who I mentioned, was so beautifully shot burning a pile of leaves by James Wong Howe. Um, I mean, it's just more than coincidence. I mean, just they're just so similar in terms of their tone and their mood, and they're both very brisk films. Jennifer's like 73 minutes, Screaming Skull's like 65. Both they have the same composer, one of the same actors, in very. They each have a small cast with sharing an actor. Both shot by famous cinematographers. It's a great. I can't recommend enough. To if you ever want to watch these movies, to do it as a back to back. And Screaming Skull is a much more readily available film. I highly recommend. I think it might be out of print, but still easy to buy. Is the Scream Factory Blu-ray of the movie, because it's the only decent release of this film, of The Screaming Skull, which for years was just on budget label DVDs, looked really crappy. Then finally, they finally released it on this 4-pack DVD through one of Shout Factory's subsidiary labels, and it was a really nice transfer. But then the sound was out of sync for like a third of the movie, and finally they put it on Blu-ray. So yeah, these are two films I love very much, and they could not fit better hands in hand. Um, so yeah, I think that covers a lot of my thoughts. Just a couple other things I think are interesting to point out about Jennifer. Just like a few random facts. When you're watching the movie, there's a scene where Duff takes Lupino out to kind of like he owns a lodge and a grocery store, but he takes Lupino to the lodge where they're having kind of like this community event, this dance, easy listening music. And Matt Dennis is in that scene singing the song Angel Eyes. So Matt Dennis was a singer and songwriter known for kind of easy listening style music. And Angel Eyes is probably his best known song, not so much from his rendition of it, but it was covered by many artists over the years, like Sinatra and even much later Willie Nelson. And Ella Fitzgerald, she recorded it 4 times. She said it was her favorite song. And I'm a big fan of that kind of 50s, 60s easy listening music. I'm a big fan of an artist named Paige Cavanaugh, but even, it's kind of a little different, but like even like Sinatra and Dee Martin, that kind of stuff. So it's cool to just have this song playing and being sung by Matt Dennis himself in that scene. Also, really interestingly, in that scene of all these couples dancing, I had looked at, in my obsession with this movie, I had looked at the IMDb, and it said that Bill Hickman was one of the dancers in that scene. And Bill Hickman is best known for his work as a stunt driver. He drove the car that Steve McQueen chases in Bullet, the classic late 60s cop film, and that very famous chase scene through San Francisco where Steve McQueen's cop character of Frank Bullitt is chasing these two hitmen, and Bill Hickman is the hitman who's driving the car. And that movie was produced by Philip D'Antoni, who was later the producer on The French Connection. And so, of course, that movie also, like Bullet, has a really famous car chase scene, and also won the Oscar for Best Editing, probably because of the car chase scene. And so, even though it's Popeye Doyle, Gene Hackman's character, who's doing the driving in that scene, it was Hickman who actually did the stunt driving. He actually was the one driving the car. And he also has a separate role in the movie as Bill Molderig, the law enforcement officer, who's very key, especially to the film's ending. And then D'Antoni, when he decided to direct the film for the first time, and I think the only time, he directed the movie The 7-Ups, a cop movie. Hickman was brought in again for that film's very famous chase scene. In which Hickman plays one of the 2 criminals in the film who are kidnapping mobsters and ransoming them, and it's Bill Hickman and Richard Lynch, and so there's a really famous car chase scene where Roy Scheider's going after them, and so Hickman did the stunt driving for that. So that's why he's really known for as a stunt driver, stunt coordinator. Worked on some other films in that position as well, but he also showed up in bit parts once in a while in films and TV. I've seen him in stuff, and he was buddies with James Dean in real life. Actually, he was there in another vehicle when James Dean died, and actually held James Dean in his arms when Dean passed away. But so when I saw that he was listed on IMDb as being in this scene as one of the patrons of this lodge dancing in the background, I was like, that just sounds like something someone typed into IMDb, because it's pretty easy to change information on Internet Movie Database. But I said, what the heck? I'll go back and watch the scene again. And sure enough, it's him. It is he, I should say. He is there in several shots dancing in the background. Not sure how he showed up in this movie, but he is there. Also in the cast is John Brown. He plays the gas station attendant near the beginning of the movie. And Brown was a really famous radio actor, and he played key characters in a number of hit old-time radio shows, which my girlfriend and I are really big fans of old-time radio. And Brown, he was on The Adventures of Ozzie and Harriet. He played the character of Thorny, Ozzie's next-door neighbor friend. It was when the show moved to TV. It was played by Don DeFore. On My Friend Irma, another hit radio show which spawned a couple movies, he played Al, the boyfriend of Irma. And then on The Life of Riley, he played the role of Digby O'Dell, the friendly undertaker, who was always giving advice to the lead character of Chester A. Riley, the dim-witted factory worker and family man, voiced by William Bendix. And he also, on Life of Riley, had another role. He voiced Riley's buddy, Gillis. So he was a very well-known radio actor, but he also had appeared in films, too. And he was actually English by birth, though he, was known for his work in America. But the thing about Brown was, like James Wong Howe, this film's cinematographer, is that he fell victim to the Hollywood blacklist. And that happened in 1952. So after that, he still has an occasional, he still pops up in some roles, but it's interesting if you look at kind of like some of the filmography he has after that, who he works with. So he's in Jennifer, which, Ida Lupino was a liberal, was a very staunch a Democrat. And so I wonder, and actually not only was he in this film, but another one of the films he made during this time period was The Bigamist. He had a role in that, which is a movie that Lupino both directed and starred in. So I kind of wonder if it was really Lupino who kind of, basically helped him get work in these films, because I wonder if she just sympathized with his plight, because he had fallen victim to the communist witch hunt. It was also around this time he showed up in The Wild One, the famous biker movie produced by Stanley Kramer, who also was a very forward-thinking progressive person. He had given to Nedrick Young, the blacklisted screenwriter, he had given him some work, because Young co-wrote the films The Defiant Ones and Inherit the Wind, both of which Kramer directed and produced. And also, I also, of course, have to point out that he's the voice of Roman in the 1953 science fiction cult classic Robot Monster, which also, coincidentally, maybe, featured appearance from another blacklisted performer, Selena Royal, who was a well-known character actress in the 40s. So, he had this kind of like, ability to kind of pick up some roles in some of these works around this time, even after he was blacklisted. It did kind of bring, unfortunately, an end to his association with The Life of Riley, this really famous character of Digby O'Dell, who he had voiced, because Riley, like many radio shows, eventually transitioned to television. And, The Life of Riley had kind of a weird history, because they made a feature film in the late 40s, and William Bendix went from the radio show to star in the film, and John Brown recreated the role of Digby O'Dell in the movie. At the same time, they decided to do a TV version, but because of issues with Bendix's availability, they had to have Jackie Gleason play the role of Chester Riley in the TV show, which only lasted for like a year. And again, John Brown came on board to play Digby O'Dell. Well, finally, Bendix was available to do a TV show himself, and so they did The Life of Riley again as a TV series, and it was very successful, lasted for several years. But by this time, because of Brown's association with the communist witch hunt, not only would he not be able to be in the show, but they wouldn't even have the character of Digby O'Dell. And sadly, he died very young. He died in 1957, only 53 years old, only 4 years after Jennifer came out. So it's just worth kind of pointing out his history as you watch this movie. He has that scene near the beginning, and again, I just can't speak enough to like the great location work done in this movie. Like I said, shot in Montecito, California, which is now a place it's looks like it's very expensive to live. A lot of celebrities own some very expensive houses there. But as you watch the movie, check out the store owned by Howard Duff's character. That's a real store. I don't know if it still exists, but I found an actual article kind of like about its history, written by published in a online Montecito publication. So a lot of interesting locations that they found around there, and very well chose. So yeah, that's Jennifer. I look at this and the Screaming Skull is kind of like estate exploitation. Like their movies about these giant estates where nobody's there and really creepy things are going on, and they're very effective. And like I said, check these movies out. Check them out back to back. Just a terrific way to spend a late Saturday night, especially in the summertime. Very spooky, very chilling. And let me know what you think about them. And yeah, I mean, I do hope that someone does make Jennifer more readily available. I actually have a 16 millimeter print of it's either a trailer or like a TV spot for Jennifer. But if they ever have a domestic release of this movie, I would love to see that get scanned and added on if they don't have copies readily available already. Because I don't think there's even a trailer on the imprint Blu-ray. So I don't know what kind of materials even exist for this, because it was a Paramount owns the movie, but it was made by Allied Artists, which was a smaller company. So I don't know how much of that promotional material they retained. But thank you very much for listening to another installment of Carpet City Cinema. If you have any questions or suggestions or anything of such a nature, feel free to shoot us an email over at carpetcitycinema@gila-film.com. Please continue to like and share us on Facebook, like our uploads of the YouTube versions of these episodes, and share the links to us on Spotify and iTunes. Get the word out there about Carpet City Cinema so we can grow this wonderful fan base we have. And we thank you very much, though, for tuning in. We really do appreciate the support. We've had some really great feedback from some of our listeners, people who really enjoy the show, and we really do. That really does mean a lot to us that people even just take the time to listen to this. So thank you very much. All right, everybody, take care, and we will see you next week.